Okay, thank you all for joining us. We are now recording. So this is the July webinar for the Research Technology and Development Evaluation Topical Interest Group of the American Evaluation Association. Our speaker today is Ira Kukik-Kun. She is a health science policy analyst at the United States National Institutes of Health, Office of Evaluation, Performance, and Reporting. Without further ado, Ira, you have the virtual stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having me, Dee. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to have the opportunity to speak with you. And I'm going to try to share my slides. Okay. So again, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about our efforts of what we're doing with the science of science and Metascience at NIH, and to build the awareness there, and also to just get your thoughts on some of these. It would really be helpful for us. So I am in the Office of the Director, or the Office of Evaluation, Performance, and Reporting, as Dee Dee mentioned. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time introducing the NIH to this crowd, but just to reiterate that this is, we have a large budget of $48 billion a year, and there are 27 NIH institutes and centers, as you can see here in these bubbles. So it's a very large place with a lot of different research priorities, a lot of different research mechanisms, and various different mission spaces across the different institutes and centers centered around their research topics and opportunities. So with all of that, how do we focus on the stewardship of what NIH does and where federal dollars are invested in the science space? And I just wanted to briefly introduce, if you're not familiar, although I'm sure most of you are, here for this, what is science of science or Metascience? It's really research on the mechanisms that underlie the doing of science, so how we do science, with a range of topics that are, you would see, I think you clearly see a line to NIH interests of, what are the researcher topics, how do they choose topics, how do those ideas move around across the various fields, and what are the outputs of those researchers? I think with recent data availability and data tools to track the outputs from the researchers, things like Web of Science, Scopus, PubMed, we are able to ask some of these larger questions of, how is science done? What are the mechanisms across, both temporal and geographical scales? And I would argue that the definition here I'd like to add in the science of science and the purpose of this is really to improve how we do science. What are the levers that NIH could use to speed science along, make sure we are funding the best science, and to try to speed breakthrough discoveries. And so what are the levers is something that's going to be the main focus of this, of my talk here. And you can feel free to ask me questions now or drop them in the chat and I'll answer them later. So that is science of science. And the field is not necessarily new, but it is kind of expanding and growing, and it is beginning to grow momentum or gain momentum. And of course, NIH as one of the largest biomedical funders, there are many different opinions and suggestions of what NIH should do, how we should fund science. This is just one of my favorite articles, cartoons from an article from a couple of years ago that, basically, as I mentioned, NIH is a large place with many different institutes and centers, and here they've kind of stripped it down to just 3. The Health Transformation Institute is just one of those bulletin boards, so that would be interesting. So what does that look like? How should we fund science? what are the strategies in place that a funder could use, and how can we use data to help us make those decisions? So the central question that I'd like to ask is, how can NIH engage the science of science or Metascience community to better look at our impacts and our outcomes from these investments? Because if we can't quite capture the impact, how could we then optimize the system? So one of the efforts that we've tried to do over the years is do retrospective case studies of successful impact. So we put together a protocol with some evaluators. Here you can see the article. It came out in the Journal of Clinical and Translation Science in 2020, where we basically designed a protocol methodology of beginning to trace the chain of events of what does it actually take to have a successful intervention, ranging from basic foundational discovery all the way to throughout the translational process, and ultimately to link that to health outcomes, changes in health outcomes, changes in how science is done, or the societal impacts. And so this is the methodology here. It's really looking at a systematic way to link the chain of events from, for example, NIH funding to how the science changed over the course of possibly decades, to then the ultimate impact of how has this impacted the taxpayer and general population. So the reason behind some of this is touching on these science of science kinds of questions of, if we can understand how the science is done, if we can understand and identify key research markers and a bit understanding of that timelines, then potentially as a funder we could leverage those points and try to improve how science is done. So what does that actually look like, and where can you find examples of these case studies? And you can put the web link down at the page here on the slide, so at nih.gov/impact, we can find these stories of, we call them our stories, but they're retrospective case studies, and you can see what that looks like, tracing that impact from the very early stages. You're not meant to obviously read the words on this, but just to kind of get the idea of what we're doing here, trying to communicate that impact, but on a very small scale. So I have to say, these case studies are a lot of work, and because they are systematic, you really need a narrow scope, and usually they're at the program level or a very specific topic level that NIH has funded, and tracing those impacts. You can see the little bubbles of the very early foundational work, for example, the discovery work. How has that changed over the years, and what were the various actors that have kind of carried that torch throughout? It's not just NIH. We understand that we're part of a larger science ecosystem, but how have the partnerships, that coordination happened across the years, and trying to understand that at a very narrow scope within these stories, to then ultimately trace that to changes in how in changes in health outcomes. So that encompasses everything from changes in clinical guidelines and changes in how the diagnostic options or treatment options are available. So that's a narrow way that we've tried to communicate that impact and to try to understand our outcomes. But really, there's a greater need to understanding what NIH's role and impact across the years and across all the various investments, not just for our internal decision making and understanding what the evidence base is to help guide NIH decisions in various programs, policies, but also and communicate that to the public. So when the public asks, what was NIH's impact in for specific drug development, we have a better sense of that with better tools and better data. And one way to do that is to engage the scientific community to help us understand our processes and programs, because it is a large place, and of course, impact from the scientific community is very much welcome. And so I'd like to mention one of the efforts that we're involved in here today. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to the web page, which is OMB's evidence project portal. And we've partnered with the Office of Management and Budget to try this new process of seeking research partners. So this evidence project portal, NIH is one agency that is participating in it. And our central question you can see here is, how can NIH strengthen stewardship through development of robust measures for assessing impact from investments? And I'll speak a little bit more about the details of that, but if I just wanted to draw your attention that the deadline ends July 22nd, in case you are curious and would like to partner with us to help answer this question. Please do take up this opportunity. What kinds of questions are we talking about here? There are really broad, large questions, and any aspect of these questions would be really helpful to have more evidence on. So this evidence project opportunity basically posts various agencies' evidence needs in hopes that would increase partnerships with the academic community. If the academic researchers are already designing their studies, then perhaps this would be one way where we can signal the research questions that the agencies have and have that partnership be mutually beneficial, hopefully. So what are the questions that NIH would like more evidence on? You can see here, I'm not going to read all of them, but and if you follow that link, and I'm happy to share that link in the chat after I go through these slides. But questions like, how can NIH improve on identifying desired outcomes and measuring impact related to its mission? Our mission is to improve health. But obviously, as an agency, we generate a lot of evidence that then gets taken up by others, by clinicians, to ultimately drive the impact in improving health. So how can we trace that impact and find areas to improve on it? Also, how do we predict where the next scientific opportunities are and invest in that? How do we measure scientific quality, rigor, and reproducibility? These are really large questions that could benefit from any evidence, new or already existing in the field. And then also, the clinical research ecosystem. How do we ensure and maximize quality and accessibility and diversity there? How do we overcome health disparities, strengthen partnerships with underserved communities? And how do we assess risk as a federal funder of research? We know that research inherently is risky. The outcomes that we predict are sometimes not the outcomes that the research takes us in. So what is the right amount of risk as a steward of a $48 billion budget? Certainly, we do want some balance of high risk, high reward kind of research, but what is the right amount there, and how do you ensure that you are funding the right workforce that's gonna drive that research, be able to drive that research years from now? So those are some of the questions. What are we hoping for is, like I said, that the research community is interested in these questions as well, that they would provide us the expressions of interest and then eventually engage with us in this kind of research. We hope that this will eventually result in a report that summarizes recommendations or potential measures that NIH could implement to strengthen decision-making. And obviously, we will share any findings from this with NIH decision makers, and hopefully have opportunities where this could be folded into existing stewardship activities. So a lot of these research questions are already done at NIH. I don't want to make it seem like it hasn't, because NIH is a big place with a lot of smart people that are obviously analyzing the outcomes from various programs. But I think the caveat here is that oftentimes those analyses are usually limited to a particular program but at a smaller scale than what we're discussing here, which is really at that 20,000 foot level across various research portfolios across institutes and centers, and that is trickier to do. And so if there are data and methods that we could benefit from, we would obviously love to hear from the research community. And the caveat here is that there is no funding for this OMB portal partnership. And I'll mention a couple of other things that we've been working on. So the OMB portal evidence project portal partnership is just one opportunity for researchers to engage with us. Unfortunately, that opportunity is limited to data that's already publicly available on NIH Reporter, which we make a lot of our data available. Any funded grant, you can go and look, and I think this crowd probably knows, you can export to your heart's desire and look at that. But it is tricky unless you have a working knowledge and familiarity with NIH data. The structure and the implications of it can be a bit tricky to manage. But there's also a question of access to data. I think to be able to actually look at the impact and the outcomes of these investments, you almost have to ask what would have happened if the investments were not made. And for that, you would likely need access to, for example, applications that came through that weren't funded but came pretty close, or some other comparator group that would be helpful to actually have a meaningful analysis of that portfolio or that investment. And so I'll speak to that in the next slide. But again, I think NIH data are very complicated, and it is difficult to scale. I mean, oftentimes we'll have evaluation or analysis findings on a scale of how is a particular program doing, but to be able to really ask the question at the 20,000-foot level of how are we contributing to the NIH mission and what is really the impact on the workforce and the trainees, those are really large questions at a very much larger scale. And so interpreting those findings and what do we do with that once we have that information is a little bit tricky. And we'd really love to work closely with the community and partner with these researchers to work hand in hand and really understand, okay, so this is the funding and what could actually be done, what is actually actionable out of those results. Obviously, it's within statutory authority of what NIH can do. And so with that, what we're thinking about, and this is not launched yet, but it's pending approval. But what we're thinking is to have a pilot Metascience Scholars Program where these scholars would come to NIH that have this knowledge and experience in the science of science or metascience approaches, and they would gain access to proprietary data, which includes unfunded applications, and be able to do this work properly, where you could look at the comparisons. And so then they would be able to study and evaluate NIH's contributions. What we're considering is that it's going to be a special volunteer kind of a mechanism to bring these researchers in. And again, unfortunately, salary support would not be provided for this pilot right now. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention that one of our NIH institutes, the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, has a program already in place. It's the SOS Bio program. It's the Science of Science approach that really funds. So it does provide funding, and it funds a portfolio of research that would provide scientific analysis to improve the aspects of the biomedical research enterprise. And I really encourage you to follow this QR code if you are interested. So with that, there's a lot that is happening within the science of science world and NIH. And these are just some of the efforts that we're considering. I would love to and welcome your input and what your thoughts are or suggestions. And you can feel free to email me directly or reach the OD Metascience mailbox. And those are all the slides that I had. I really wanted to have a bit more of a discussion. So I'll open it up here and back to Dee Dee.
Thank you, Kira. Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't see anything in the chat yet.
Yes, this is Robin. Hi, thank you for doing this. I'm wondering if you're going to have your scholars have to be on campus, and if so, I think it would be very difficult to get people to come without paying salary, like through an IPA.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, they would not have to be on campus. This opportunity would be remote. However, they would have to do it on a government furnished equipment as part of that to get data access, and obviously sign all the data use agreement policies. So
Also, who would pay for the security clearance? Because when I did this, I brought a university professor to do this in 2010 when I was an OER, and we paid her salary through an IPA, but she also had to go through all the security stuff, and that costs money. I assume that NIH will pay for that.
we're still discussing those details internally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a great idea. My question is, how is this different than the NIGMS program?
Yeah, so the NIGMS program does not provide access to the proprietary data, as far as I understand. Researchers can apply for funding and pitch the ideas of doing this kind of research on science and science, but they would have to request access separately.
But they can get it if they want, right? Through the grant program.
I suppose so. This is just a bit more formalized way of engaging them and getting them on board to look at these specific kinds of questions. So
Yeah.
the NIGMS program is a partnership with NSF, which is the home for a lot of the science of science kinds of research. And it's a partnership, but the funded grants end up being of in alignment with NIH interests. But this is like any other grant where they would get access, they would get funded to do this work. And the access to the data is a whole other more complicated story that we're trying to figure out with our Office of Extramural Research. It turns out it's more complicated than I expected to get access to NIH data and impact to data.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware of that since
Yeah.
I used to be in DSAR. I used to lead DSAR for 6 years. So, but at that time, there was a grant program. I don't think NIGMS has it anymore, and I sat on the steering committee for it. That actually it was explicit about giving all the funded grantees access to the proprietary data for workforce, and that's what they did. It was a research workforce grant program where they looked at these things. And, one thing that I know from, and some of the people on this call, of course, know this as well, that it takes like a year to understand impact 2 data, where all this stuff is, just to understand the table structure, how to get it, do all the joins and stuff. So you would have to have a long program to enable people to learn how to use the data first before they can even analyze it.
Right. I think that is one of the issues that we've been grappling with. And so what we're proposing and what we're thinking to do is for the pilot to just limit it to 2 scholars initially, because it is going to be a close partnership with NIH staff, with the NIH evaluation analytic community, of just understanding what those data are and how they're structured and what's, how to do that in the best way. And I think the capacity to do that, we're just limited to 2 for the first year and see how that goes.
And is the restriction to citizens because of the difficulty of getting access? So many of the people that do this type of work are not US citizens.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Wish you didn't have to have that restriction, but I
know.
Ira, there is another question. There is a question in the chat from Melissa Day. What do you think it would take to get one or both of these funded more fully? Is it an appropriations thing?
So, you know, I think it's a combination of things. Some of it is trying to get something from the community that is more closely aligned with what is actionable for NIH. I think a lot of the, you know, we've been following the field and a lot of the publications that come out of it, and it's really wonderful. You learn a lot about science and you know, everything from what drives innovation and you know, you could trace those outcomes in patents. But there seems to be a gap with, okay, and what can we as a funder do with that information? What, you know, there seems to be a little bit more research needed in translating that into what it would take as a funder. What are the mechanisms? What are the policy levers that it would take to actually then improve that science? So I think it's a little bit of both, where we clearly need more of a handshake and a closer collaboration with the community to do this. So basically, I think we need to talk. We need the skill sets from both to come together and hopefully have something that's productive and actually show value of that partnership and what it could bring to science. I think that's just to begin.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could get like a whole section of AAAS fellows on this, right? Like that would be a pretty nice use case, but I know that you're restricted. It's hotly competitive who gets those folks and how to pay for it and everything. So
Yeah.
I don't know if does this satisfy, well, since it's a scholars program, but are you thinking it satisfies the, like, if you're not a Fed, you can't do Fed work. This is clearly something that would support Fed work, but you don't need to be a Fed to do it. Is that something like that you could, if you had a free AAAS fellow, like have them help? Or, you know, you can only have like folks who are already in the federal government advise and help specifically these scholars, but anybody else, I guess, is sort of a wider question.
Mm-hmm. So I think being a former fellow, myself an alum, I do definitely think that AAAS fellows, science and technology policy fellows, sorry, are very interested in this, right? So we come to federal agencies to understand how science policy is done. So that is definitely not off the table, and you can see great alignment there. However, I think what we're really trying to do with some of these efforts are bring in the science of science community more into the fold and all of the skills that they have to bear on this. So not mutually exclusive, certainly, but it's just sort of, we see it as trying to enrich that that capability, so we can also learn from these scholars and hopefully grow that capacity more at NIH as well.
Oh, gotcha. I see the distinction. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Need to get some of Dashoon's kids to be AAAS fellows. That's what you need.
Yeah.
Here, there's a question from Robin, if you'll share your slides. Robin, the recording will be available on the YouTube site, so at least accessible that way. But Ira, I don't know if you'd want to share your slides in addition.
Sure. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Will there be any, will there be any restrictions on what people can publish from their analyses, or will you let them publish?
There are certainly opportunities to publish findings. They would just have to be cleared through the Office of Extramural Researchers clearance process.
Interesting. So
Sorry?
it would be them, not you, not your office. This fellowship is a joint project between your office and OER?
Yes. It's a close partnership with our Office of Extramural Research. Yeah, they are the holders of our data. So
in my experience, there's just so much more data that's not public. than reporter, that it provides really extraordinary possibilities, especially if you do data linkage to other data sets. And I don't know whether you're going to do that. And since it's being done with NSF, will they have access to the linked data to the survey of earned doctorates and the doctorate recipient files? Will they have that access? You have to sign you have to be notarized to get access to those data. But OER has access. I wonder whether these people will, because that will expand again, like a lot of the workforce stuff.
That's a great question. And I think some of that really depends on what the proposals are when they come in, what the research community is interested in tackling. And we can have those discussions when this officially launches. But you're exactly right. I think what is really exciting for us is to be able to make those linkages of beyond grants and publications and eventually, patents too, just how making those linkages to the guidelines and to health outcomes and disease burden, all of that is really exciting and interesting. But it does take a different skill set, I think, and the community is really well poised to be able to capitalize on that, I think. And, as I was saying, NIH provides the research base and that foundation, what happens to it afterwards, and tracing that through these linkages. And I think the promise of generative AI is really interesting here. So we'll see what comes through.
Yes, I mean, especially with AI, because a lot of the things that we would want to analyze are in PDF forms, also private, but like the BioSketch has all sorts of stuff in it. And if one could use AI to extract things that right now takes a long time to do manually, but might provide some interest. And NIH already does the matching to publications and patents, but I don't know how well we've been doing it for guidelines. I know we tried. I don't know if that's still active, but there's a lot of things you can match to in the past that we have matched to really expand insights. But what you're looking for, it sounds like, is people with great analytic, big data skills, big data scientist type people. And how are you going to educate them about the policies that you have to know about grants policy to understand these data, because the data reflect business processes, not performance measures. We're turning them into performance measures. Are you all going to give them like the curriculum for program officers on, which would probably be useful, on the data and stuff?
Yeah, so what we're thinking is there'll be probably a set of trainings that they would take initially, in addition to meeting with our community of practice and talking to some of the people that have already been doing some of this work at NIH and understanding what the challenges are. We're thinking that some of the, the core curriculum training would be really helpful in understanding all the gears across NIH and how we do what we do. Yeah, because there's a reason for that bureaucracy.
And is there somebody who's going to be like an analytic project lead to help them answer their questions about all the data?
That might be a great question. I think that might be folks from our office that would kind of help liaise with that and provide a little bit of that orientation. That's what we're thinking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. I see Melissa's question.
Sorry, Erin, may I put your email in the chat so that people can contact you for slides?
Sure. Yeah, okay. I can drop that in.
And as you said, there is a question in the chat from Melissa.
Yes, the timeline on the evidence project portal is that we're looking for expressions of interest and how the researcher experience aligns with these questions and how they would tackle it by the 22nd of July. And then depending on how, thank you for doing that, Dee Dee. I was in the middle of typing, but I can't talk and type at the same time, it turns out. Right, so they have until the 22nd of July to send their expressions of interest in and their CVs. And we hope to turn that around, hopefully in a month or two, to be able to get back to them and start actually tackling some of those questions and projects. And we're hoping that we're willing to meet with these researchers and explain NIH data, explain NIH processes, and help them kind of structure that research if needed, and hopefully within a year to have preliminary findings is the goal. So it's very much still open, Melissa.
Well, I don't know if I'll make it to Copenhagen for ICSSI next year, but maybe by that time we'll have some other update here or something.
Sounds good. Any other questions, concerns? Do you think this might work? Have you tried something like this and then it worked or didn't work? Would love to hear from you. I hear you, Robin. Yeah, we're still figuring out the details before launching. Yeah. I think we say right now that the Scholars Program would be, you know, for the special volunteer, you know, mechanism for a year, but potentially renewable. So we'll see.
I think one thing that might be really effective, if possible, is to give give these folks some analyst time, right? As you said, there are pockets where this kind of work is being done already at NIH, and it's not necessarily always the obvious places. But it might be an interesting partnership, and indeed a closer partnership if some analysts who are already doing the work could work with these folks.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully if we can't be helpful, then we can put them in touch with whoever is doing this work and most knowledgeable at NIH already. So that's the goal.
Yeah. I think formalizing that as part of the program will give everybody an extra incentive to chip in, make it work. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, I think that this is a bigger lift to be able to master this than most people realize. And that's why I think you need as much time as possible, but also to make that clear. I mean, they need to learn grants policy, they need to learn impact to data, and they have to have the analytic skills to do all these not just data extraction, but all the different types of analyses, and better yet, if they know how to do, you know, fuzzy matching between data sets and, you know, all the advanced stuff. And each one of those takes a lot of time. And, you know, the other thing that I can say, we used to, when Sally Rocky was head of OER and she had started her blog, we became the unit that produced data for her blog, and it took over my office. And what we learned, which was really interesting, and this is the controversy part, is like about 80% of the time, the answers we got when, so the leadership asked us to, you know, they had a hypothesis, we think this is happening, so go analyze the data. Like 80% of the time that the answers came back different than we expected. And sometimes that meant we didn't go forward because we didn't want to put that out there. But you will find, I mean, the controversies will be unexpected findings that may not put NIH in a good light, and how to handle that. I think your office has to think about that, and OER as well. How much intellectual freedom are you going to give the analysts if they find things that we don't like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point.
It's surmountable, but I mean, anything you do in advance to work that out, like what they can publish and what they can't, you know, clearance going to be, if we don't like your findings, we're going to stop you from publishing? It shouldn't be that, but I mean, I'm just saying those are the types of things to think about.
No, I don't think so. I think that's a very valid point that you raise, and thank you for asking it. I think there are already examples where NIH has partnered with researchers, right? So I think we're very familiar with Donna Ginther and how she partnered and got access to NIH data, produced a paper in PNAS in 2011 that, you know, I think we refer to as the Ginther effect in NIH funding, and we still reference it today, and it wasn't exactly in the most positive light, but I, and she did publish it. So I think there are definitely cases of that happening, and how do we learn from it? What do we do to change that is the bigger question.
Well, that was because Raynard Kington was deputy director of NIH. That's how that happened. And,
Okay.
it has to do with leadership support for this type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, from what everybody that we've talked to and all of the presentations that we've given so far has been overwhelmingly positive. I think.
Yeah, there has been a long history of this, of people becoming special researchers to get access to the data. So I think that it's wonderful. I hope you're able to scale it up.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really trying to be very thoughtful about how we do it before we officially launch it. So getting this kind of input is really helpful. And yeah, it is trickier than it seems.
Well, the other thing to do, which is variable across the OD and also the ICs, is to hire staff like this inside, hire more of them, and do our own work on this. Because there is, since we started doing this 15 years ago, there have been a number of ICs and the OD that has published over time on all of this, but it doesn't seem to be as much of a priority to hire more staff like this as I'd like to see. Because if we were employees here, we have access to all the data, so we can, we have the richness and the access of the data, but we also need, to have the talent here that, to augment it. There's plenty of talent, but there could be even more, so we are able to generate more of this ourselves internally.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point and an interesting one to look at, because there are a couple other scholar programs at NIH, and their mission and objectives are slightly different, and some of it, I wonder if it's just, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of different priorities, and sometimes that the scope of that work might shift maybe to help address some of the more pressing priorities, I wonder. So how do you build that protected time? I think is difficult. But
Well,
not impossible.
there are units that do this. I mean, that's what their purpose is. But we're
Mhm.
limited in salary and number of FTEs and all this other stuff.
Great. Okay, well, I think you have my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out. I would love to talk to all of you, and thank you again, Dee Dee, for having me.
Oh, thank you, Yara, for doing this, and good luck with this effort. I think there is much anticipation and hope for its success. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.